What if I told you that God's generosity doesn't always seem fair by human standards? The parable of the vineyard workers shows us just how different God's ways are from our own. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus tells a parable that challenges our understanding of fairness and generosity. It's the story of the vineyard workers, found in Matthew 20 verses 1 to 16, and it invites us to reflect on God's generous nature. The story begins with a landowner who hires workers early in the morning to work in his vineyard. He agrees to pay them a fair wage for a day's labor. But as the day goes on, the landowner continues to hire more workers at different times of the day, even as late as the 11th hour. When the day ends, he pays all the workers the same wage, regardless of how long they worked. Those who worked the longest are upset, believing it's unfair that those who worked less received the same pay. The landowner, however, responds with a question: am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? Matthew 20 verse 15. At first glance, this story might seem unfair. In our human understanding, we believe that those who work longer hours should be rewarded with more. But this parable reveals something much deeper about God's generosity and His ways. It challenges us to reconsider how we view fairness and how we understand God's grace. Jesus uses this parable to teach us about God's boundless generosity. The landowner represents God, and the workers represent us, His children. God's love and grace are not given based on what we deserve, but out of His unending mercy. No matter when we come to Him, whether at the beginning of our lives or at the end, He welcomes us with open arms and promises the same reward: eternal life with Him. This parable reminds us that God's generosity is not about fairness in the way we typically understand it. It is about grace, something we cannot earn, but something God freely gives to all who come to Him. In fact, God's grace is always abundant, overflowing, and unmerited. The workers who labored only a short time received the same reward as those who worked all day, and this reflects how God's grace is available to everyone, regardless of when they come to Him in faith. For those of us who have been following God for many years, it's easy to feel entitled to His blessings because of our devotion. But this parable warns us against such thinking. It is not by our works that we receive God's grace, but by His generous will. As St. Paul wrote in Ephesians 2 verses 8 to 9, "For it is by grace you have been saved, through faith, and this is not from yourselves, it is the gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast." God's generosity also calls us to reflect on our own attitudes toward others. How do we respond when others, who may have come to faith later in life or seem less devoted, receive the same blessings as us? Do we begrudge God's generosity, or do we celebrate it? This parable encourages us to embrace God's generosity and to rejoice in the fact that His grace is available to all, regardless of when they come to Him. In conclusion, the parable of the vineyard workers teaches us that God's generosity is not about fairness as we know it, but about grace. It challenges us to see the world through God's eyes, where His love is abundant and given freely to all. Let us, then, be grateful for the grace we have received and share that same generosity with others, remembering that, in God's kingdom, everyone is invited to receive the same reward: His love and eternal life.